broadcasting live from the Roanoke Valley of southwestern Virginia. Join us and see what life looks like from a medium's perspective with Reverend Tracey Lockwood, the medium's medium. We'll explore the tools of psychic development, hear stories and experiences from the other side, and learn to listen to our natural intuition. Now, our host, Reverend Tracey Lockwood.
Hello, beautiful lights, and welcome to another episode of From a Medium's Perspective. Before we get into today's show, I just wanted to remind you that I teach psychic mediumship one-on-one. I offer one-on-one private tutoring, and I also offer a certification program that's a 12-week in-depth immersion style program where we cover pretty much every technique that's possible out there. I'm not saying every exercise ever created, but definitely the span of tools that go from the body basics through the left brain into the psychic tools for mediumship, letting go of tools, working with mediumship, and moving on into channeling, all in 12 weeks, plus a tremendous amount of background information. So if you're interested in that, you can find more information at my website, which is mediumtracylockwood.com. Well, today we have an extremely interesting guest. The Rainbow Light Trust has provided us talks with Carol and Sandra Lamb and with Jennifer Waters. And today they are sharing another one of their amazing people from their teaching and healing organization. It's based in Northern England. And our gentleman that joins us today grew up, he always had a love for music. He's a music channel. And I don't mean that you play him like YouTube. I mean that he is a channel for spirit, and that expresses itself through his music. He grew up playing music, loving music. He played trombone when he was in school. He was in the school orchestra. He played in a local orchestra. And then he went on from there to study physics at university, and he started a pretty left-brain career with an international IT company. And in 2000, the year 2000, actually on Christmas Eve, some changes that were very heavy life changes began to shift him away from the complacency of a pretty happy and stable life to one of, for a few months, that was just filled with mental and emotional turmoil. And like all of us, when we go through stress, stress is the mother of creativity, and it often forces us to take deeper looks at things. And in a very brief time, I think 6 months is a pretty brief time, he had a spiritual awakening. And he rediscovered music from a different angle and began composing music, and it gave him a great deal of joy. And he's been composing ever since. His music has been used in films and educational DVDs, and he's just released 2 CDs. And he's also written a manual for the Academy of Spiritual Sciences on using music for healing. So I am more than pleased to introduce to you today Michael Kowalski. Welcome to the show, Michael. We're so happy to have you here.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure, Tracy, and thanks for the introduction.
We were joking before the show. I said you're the clearest guest that I've had, and the clearest channel that I've had on this show, and we were giggling over the clarity of your equipment. Thank you so much. That's such a pleasure. Thank you.
Oh dear.
Sometimes our guests like to check in and spy on our guests while they're listening to the show. And so I want to share your website up front, and I'll do that a couple more times during the show. But it's an interesting name. It's the Amadeus Project.co.uk. And you also have a YouTube channel that can be found under Amadeus Project. So if you're out there listening and you want to check out Michael Kowalski, channeler of music from spirit, please do so. His YouTube channel, just feel free to subscribe when you're there. It's always appreciated. And again, Michael, welcome so much to the show. I'm so happy to have you here.
Well, I've been looking forward to this, Tracey, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about my experiences.
Oh, my extreme pleasure. I think I wanted to start with just sort of your interpretation of just in general, what is a channel and what is channeling for those people that might be less familiar?
Well, I believe channeling is really where, by raising our own consciousness, we're able to access through the intuition higher realms of consciousness where guidance presides, where guidance lives. So through, by doing this, by following a spiritual discipline and expanding my energy, improving my intuition, but also balancing my energy field, it enables me to access guidance from those guides and masters who are wanting to do their work on Earth through people who are physically present on this sphere.
You know, it might be curious to some people, you know, why would music be important? Not that we don't enjoy music, not that we don't synchronize with it, of course, but how do you feel like spirit uses music?
I think in so many ways. But I think probably the key aspect of music is that just as the ancient people and the ancient traditions in many parts of the world would all believe, music itself is something that is really vital for the well-being and for the healing of people. Of course, in many ancient traditions, the North American Indians being one, but a lot of the Aboriginal traditions all over the world, there's always been a tradition of using music for healing, or drums and chants. And it's something that in our very material lives today, we tend to forget because we've got easy access to drugs and to surgery that we wouldn't have had 200 or 300 years ago, let alone many years before that.
Mm-hmm. But, so we're living longer and more complicated lives.
Well, we're living more complicated lives, but also I think there is a difference between healing and curing a symptom. And I think really what we have found ourselves doing in the medical profession these days is very much finding ways in which to treat a symptom, but it doesn't necessarily cure the underlying cause that led to that symptom manifesting. And there are other ways of doing that. And one of the best and easiest ways of doing that, almost painless ways of doing that, is through the right kind of music.
You know, we forget that we're vibrational beings for the most part. I mean, even those of us that work in the field sometimes forget that we are, you know, and that we're sort of these clouds of energy that, you know, interact with other people and come in contact with other vibrations. And tell us a little bit. I guess the first thing I wanted to know is fairly rudimentary. I basically was just curious what your first memory of music was.
Oh well, it's really my mum's singing "Michael Row the Boat Ashore" to me as a child.
Oh,
yeah. I didn't particularly come from a musical family in that there was no musical instruments around, and indeed we didn't really have a particularly good record collection in my early years. but my mother used to be she was a good singer and loved to sing, and
Oh,
used to love listening to what she would term good singers on the radio. So crooners, like Bing Crosby and Perry Como, she used to like. Country singers like Slim Whitman, Jim Reeves. So
yeah.
so I used to I grew up really being encouraged to not only listen to these people but also to sing, and that really was where it all started for me. I really did start to love music from an early age. But
I'm sorry. When did you formally sing, either in a religious setting or a school setting at some point?
Well, we did go to church on Sundays, so I would sing at church. In fact, I think the first song I remember singing in church, and it's a very vivid memory for me, this. I don't know how old I was. I was probably about 2 or 3 years old. And in the middle of Mass, I suddenly started singing Champion the Wonder Horse at the top of my voice.
Oh!
Which was quickly followed by my mother slapping my legs.
Oh! You were just raising the vibration, as you still do.
Yeah.
When did you start formally playing? Like, when did you first try an instrument, and did you take lessons, or how did that go?
Well, at first, the first instrument I ever really was able to play was, or to start playing, was a piano. Funnily enough, when I was about 9 years old, my parents moved house, and the house was much larger. And of course, by the time all the furniture had been put into place, there was lots of room around the house that needed to be filled with something else. And they acquired a piano, and which I thought was wonderful. And very quickly, I found that I was able to pick out tunes. And,
just from ear, or from?
Yeah, from ear. And my mother was great. She used to encourage me to do it, and then was able to develop that into being able to play chords, and gradually was able to work out accompaniments to the pop songs of the day as I was growing up. But I never had any piano lessons, and still to this day haven't had any piano lessons at all, even though I do like to play the piano.
Wow. Well, what drew you to the trombone? I'm thinking of all instruments. Why the trombone? What was it that appealed to you? Or how did that happen? I guess I should say.
It's so funny, really. Sometimes the reasons for making decisions. What happened was when I moved from primary school to secondary school, the school I joined had a really good music tradition. And at the very first music lesson that we had, the music teacher just made the point that he said it was recognized in this school that the people who play instruments tend to do better in exams. And of course, over the years since then, I've begun to understand that actually he wasn't just trying to encourage people to get to follow his music courses. It really is true.
Yes, not just by any means necessary, but yes, it actually does. Yes.
But at the time in England, there was a trombonist who used to appear on TV a lot called George Chisholm, and he had his own small jazz group, and he was quite a comedian, was George Chisholm, and I used to like watching him. And so I thought, I'd love to play a trombone like George Chisholm.
Oh, yeah, we do get inspired by that.
And as it turned out, it was a really, really good choice, because hardly anybody at the school, I think there was only myself and one other person, played a trombone. So I was very quickly fast-tracked into the school orchestra, whereas if I'd been playing a violin or a flute, there was lots of people who did that.
Oh, so very cool. Yeah. Well, you're clearly quite good, or you wouldn't continue to be doing this. So, and I've heard some of your music. Unfortunately, the pieces that you sent, I couldn't get them downloaded. But if people wanted to hear your music, where could they hear samples of it? Is there anything on your website?
There is. There's samples on the website, and there's also you can find links on my website to music. I've got some CDs that are available on iTunes, Amazon MP3, Spotify, and so on. So it's possible to stream and download the music.
Oh, that's great.
But if you go to the website, that's a good place to start.
Oh, thank you. And that's the AmadeusProject.co.uk. Hope that made sense. AmadeusProject.co.uk. Well, so when you started to, you went through all this in the year 2000.
Oh,
By
yeah.
2001, you were shifted. Do you want to share anything about that process for you and how you got drawn to the music again?
Sure. I mean, I did throughout my school life. I did play the trombone, but as you mentioned in your introduction, Tracy, I navigated towards a scientific educational background, did a degree in physics, and then went into a highly technical career in IT. Oh. And after leaving school, I lost basically all the music connections that I had. So I gave up playing the trombone. I no longer played in orchestras. And my only connection really with music was playing the piano from time to time, especially in sing-alongs. You know, I was quite handy at parties where people might.
That's great.
But you know, the sort of "you hum it, I'll play it" type of
Awesome.
But that's all I ever really did with music. But then what happened was in around about the year 2000, I'd been working on a very long-term assignment, working away from home throughout the week. And although I was in a pretty stable family life and with children, it obviously put quite a lot of strain on the relationship, being away for 5 days a week for a very long period of time. And eventually the relationship broke down. And at that time, as you said in the introduction, it was a very, very tricky time. I was in my mid-40s, and I remember looking at my life and thinking, this was never planned.
Yes.
I never expected this. I'm doing a job which I'm no longer enjoying, and then I'm coming home to an empty house at weekends. What? There must be something better than this.
It must be.
Yes. And at the same time, because I was going through all this, I was doing a lot of emotional and mental reevaluation of what had been going on. I was having difficulty sleeping. I wasn't good, but somehow I managed to get through every day and managed to function, even though looking back, I'm not sure how that happened. And it was my sister.
Yeah, very depressing part of life, for sure. Sure. It's difficult, yes.
It's it. And it was actually my sister who came to see me one day, and I was just talking with her about how I was doing, and she said, "Look, I know somebody who I think might be able to help you get through this." And she mentioned the name Carol Lamb to me. And,
Carol Lamb! Oh, wow!
One of your previous guests. She knew Carol, or knew of Carol, so I ended up booking an appointment with Carol. Didn't know what to expect at all. I knew that she was a healer, but I didn't know what to expect. And I turned up for my therapy appointment. Carol talked to me about the reasons for my coming, what had been happening in my life that made me want to see her. And then eventually she started taking me through an energy alignment. I closed my eyes. She took me through this process.
Is that the emerald alignment that they have? Yeah.
Yes, that's right. We use the emerald alignment really as a core part of our work, but it did end with an emerald alignment. But she also took me through other processes as well in the work that she does. The way in which she works is very intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of this, I don't know how long I must have been lying down on the therapy bed with Carol taking me through this healing. But at the end of it, literally just as I was about to leave, she said, "Michael, you need to be writing music." And it actually shocked me.
Yes.
But in a strange way, because I'd always had an affinity with music. But of course, as soon as Carol used those words, the very first thing that happened, probably because this is really what I was meant to be doing.
Yes.
But the first thing that happened was I kind of got into a mental argument, listing internally all the reasons why this didn't make any sense at all. I've not been trained to write music. I can't really play any instrument properly these days. You know, I've only ever played the piano by ear, and it's ages since I've played the trombone. Dida. And
I can relate to that. I can relate to that. Yes, because when I was at Arthur Findlay College of Psychic Science, the 3 readings I got, everyone said, "Why aren't you doing private readings and teaching?" And I was like, "What? Like, I'm here to study." Like, you know, I know, I can totally relate.
But the funny thing was that at the same time as having this argument in my mind, somewhere deep inside, I actually could feel a real release. And and it was almost as if there was a part of me saying, "Yes, at last."
Yes. I understand, definitely.
And then so gradually what happened was I booked in for further sessions with Carol. And of course, one of the very first things I asked the next time I saw her was, "So what was that about?" and explained to her why it didn't really make a lot of sense to me. But I'd like to know if I could write music. And that's when Carol started talking to me about using your intuition, about the fact that guides are wanting they're there in the light, waiting for people who want to engage with them. They do work with people, whether they know it or not. They do work with people whenever they can. But it's possible to actually channel music consciously by doing the right kind of spiritual work in order to give myself or give oneself the capacity to intuit and connect with the guides. So that really started. So that just gave me a way forward then, which, although again, still a little bit of doubt and mental argument, but very, very quickly I thought I'd like to do this. I really would like to do this. And the other thing which I should mention as well is that although I'm sorry, I can talk about this for ages, Tracey.
I hope you can. We're doing fine. Always up for part 2, no problem.
But what was really interesting, and one of the reasons why deep down inside I knew somehow that I could do this, there was an experience I'd had about 2 or 3 years before I met Carol, back in 1999. And what happened was, when I played the piano, I generally just be listening to some songs and think, "Oh, I'd like to try and play that." And so I'd work out, you know, how to play a pop song. But from time to time, I would improvise and just play whatever I felt was coming to me. And normally, as soon as I played it, I would forget it. It was almost as if as soon as my fingers had left the keys, the memory of what I played left with it. But back in 1999, there was one period when every time I came to the piano, I always ended up playing this same piece. and a little bit more would come, and a little bit more. And it was really quite unusual for me, was this. And the other thing that happened is, you know how sometimes you hear a piece of music at the start of the day and it just plays in your mind throughout the day. You can't get it out of your mind. You always find it. Yeah. Well, this music was playing in my head that I played. It was going around in my head. But what was interesting was, although I'd played it on the piano, I was hearing it with an orchestral accompaniment.
Wow. I would think that's kind of like Mozart when he wrote, and possibly Beethoven as well, like hearing the music.
Yeah, well, in fact, quite a few more. I must admit, I've been quite surprised to find in the years since just how many of today's musicians and songwriters actually have these kind of experiences and have talked about them. But it was very unusual for me at the time.
Yes.
And what I ended up doing was I ended up following this and thinking, well, I wonder if I could orchestrate this. So I actually went onto the internet, found a piece of shareware software that would allow me to write a musical score, and also would allow me to play some synthesized instrument sounds back through the sound card of my laptop computer. So it was very basic stuff, but at the time I thought, oh, I'd love to have a go at this.
Yeah.
And I ended up writing this this accompaniment to this piano part that I had. But it was what was funny was I enjoyed the process, and at the end of it I had something that I thought, actually, that sounds pretty good. And I played it to one or two members of the family and some close friends, but I had no real urge to ever continue with that. And I actually never really thought it was anything other than just something that I don't even know really what I thought it was. It was just a real one-off experience.
Yeah,
that I just happened to chance upon, and wasn't sure whether it was good, bad, but I was proud of it anyway.
Yes.
But as it turned out, as I say, that was a couple of years before I met Carol. And as it turned out, that piece of music, although I thought all I was doing was trying something new with this tune that I'd played on the piano, it turned out to be something that was of really quite considerable importance.
Oh, that's beautiful. What's the name of that piece?
Well, at the time,
did you name it?
At the time, I'm very creative. I called it 1999 because I had written it in 1999. So
that's a great name. That's a great name.
Yeah, actually, what I should mention as well, just about that music before going on with the story, was that as I was writing it, I said I could hear an orchestration, which prompted me to orchestrate it, and then but the other thing that I had while I was writing it was a real sense of images to do with the sea. I actually thought maybe it's that the music is evocative of the sea, but I used to get images of the sea, and I also had a feeling of somehow that this was connected to a love story. But somehow I just thought maybe that's just fanciful on my part, thinking that maybe one day that this would be a film, I made it to a film or something, But so I remember having the thoughts, but never really considered that they meant a great deal. But it was only much later, after I'd met Carol and started going through the process of learning to write music. I think sometime into my meetings with Carol, I mentioned to her that I had actually written a piece of music before, to which she said, "Right, let's hear it." And and so eventually, I this was just something that I'd only had on my laptop. I'd never made it into a CD or anything else. So eventually, I managed to put it onto a disc for Carol. I left it with her, and a few weeks later, she started telling me about the significance, but she said, I want to listen to it with you, and I want to tell you about this. And so what she did was we sat down and she explained that she'd been doing some work with one of her past life memories. Now, you've obviously met Carol or interviewed Carol.
Oh,
so you
just a beautiful woman. Just her spirit is just all of them that I've run into from there, you included.
Oh no, she is, and of course she's done a lot of work with past life memory, including her own, and she has the ability to access her own past life memories really quite easily. But there was one life that she'd been doing a lot of work with for her own healing over many months, and it was the life in the early 20th century involving a young Russian aristocrat who was leaving Russia at the time of the Russian Revolution to rejoin with a husband who had left to start a new life in the United States. And so she'd been doing some work on this life over many months. But what she described to me was that what she had really is a lot of fragments. And a little bit like a jigsaw puzzle, she had lots of pieces, but she couldn't piece together the whole picture, the whole story. And what she said is that as soon as she heard the music for the first time, it immediately brought forward that memory, but also with it came some parts of the story that she hadn't previously been able to remember. And this is when she said, "Let me just play the music for you, and I'll tell you what I'm seeing." And she played it, and then described to me how she was the Russian lady. She was alone on a liner going across the ocean, heading towards New York, staring into the sea, wondering what lies ahead, and thinking about, obviously, very emotionally about what she's leaving behind. And while she's on the journey, she ended up forming a very close friendship with a young Irishman who was on the same liner, going from Ireland, because the ship called in Cork in Ireland. And Irishman was also heading for a new life in New York. And she formed a friendship with this young Irishman. And eventually she met up with a husband, but in time, in this story, she would leave her husband to meet up with the Irishman and start a new life with the Irishman in New York. Now, Carol was telling me all of this. At that point, I just said to her, "You're not going to believe this, but when I was writing it, I thought this was something to do with the ocean." Of course, Carol believed it straight away. She said,
yes, definitely. No, not chance. Yes.
Yeah, and she also said, "So when did you write it as well?" And I said, "Well, it was sometime in 1999." And she explained to me that at the time she was really keen to have a music connection because, as we've already said, music is such an important tool in healing, and as a therapist, Carol had always valued having that capability. And she'd been asking for a music connection, and she'd actually received direct guidance back in 1999 that there is a connection waiting for you, but it will take some time. And that was at the time that I was actually being given this piece of music. Now, I presume that was maybe a test for me.
I think it's a beautiful reciprocity. It's like the two of you met in the ethers and decided to work together probably before you came into this life. And what an incredible reciprocity, what an incredible gift for her to unlock your music, but for you to unlock her memory. That's just incredibly beautiful.
Well, I must admit it was very, very moving for me. I mean, certainly, it taught me so many things. Did that with regard to life plan, with regard to really never taking for granted what you're doing, because sometimes you may be just doing something which you feel has very little significance, as I did, and yet it turns out to be something that at some point turned out, I discovered that it was of great importance, and for me to be able to pay back Carol just something, even just a little bit of what she gave to me was absolutely wonderful from my point of view. The fact that I was able to, in some small way, help her, because certainly.
Really, I was just thinking how beautiful, like you talked about orchestrating and meaning that in the technical sense of, putting the parts together for your music, but isn't it incredible to think about the universe putting all of us together and all those vibrations and harmonies coming in? You can almost imagine, you in isolation being heard as you wrote your piece, and then the tragedy of your relationship, and the pieces falling apart, and yet in the background, Carol making that call out. It's just, that's how life is. And to me, it's really incredible how the experiences that we perceive as negative are not there to hurt us, although they are hurtful and painful while we move through them, but they're intended to push us toward possibilities and options that are ever more positive, ever more rewarding, ever more deep. It's
that's so true. It's so true. And I've come across various different people who've had very similar experiences to me in this respect, where they've come through the dark night of the soul.
Yes.
And at the time, probably the most difficult and challenging time of their life, but they, looking back, just appreciate it as being the most valuable time of their life too. Yeah.
I actually did an episode focused on the dark night of the soul, and it's not an easy time for anyone, but it is just, your story is so illustrative in the sense that it gives that a surety that there is something going on of purpose in the midst of chaos. So beautiful. So beautiful.
Yeah. And certainly, Tracy, what it taught me is that we are never alone. I could see through, in hindsight, I could look back at my own story, look back at the steps that I was making all the way through my life, and realizing that I was actually being guided to make certain decisions that at the time didn't appear to make any sense.
That path to our AKA life purpose, a lot of us are struggling. I think you and I have found our life purpose, and Carol certainly as well. But people wonder, like, what is my life purpose? But it's, it's a culmination of our experiences and finding ourselves in the exact right place at the exact right time. It does make me wish and long for having, found it earlier in life. But I think some of the brocade and texture of life, both the dark and light, the shadow and the brilliance, were important to probably for me, for my mediumship and for my ability to read psychically for other people too, and for you through the music that you create.
Yeah, that's true.
When you did begin, how did it evolve? From your sort of stunned what state to like, how did it go from there to here for you?
Well, I once I'd decided I really wanted to do this, I then started looking at how I needed to equip myself in order to be able to write music. So found a way using my laptop, which had worked for me, but obviously that was not really the best type of equipment to be using. So ended up doing some research, finding the right kind of music equipment, and then really followed Carol's guidance to me. She was giving me instruction on how to begin to channel, and that involved really paying attention to my energy field, being very conscious of how I am, regular alignment, energy alignments, using the emerald alignment, and also meditation.
Oh, yes.
And all these things in combination really helping to charge me energetically and helping me to build up my intuitive capacity. And then Carol then was also able to give me some instructions as to how I should go about the process of writing music. So it had come to me by whatever means, but certainly not because I intended it back in 1999. But now I was intending to write music. So Carol just said, you need to connect with the guide. So every time you begin to write music, meditate first, ask to be connected to the guides who are going to be working with you at this time, align, and then begin. And she also encouraged me to start small, just build up from only doing half an hour at a time initially, because we're working with a high energy, and this was something I was not accustomed to.
Yes.
And by trying to overdo it, it was possible to literally begin to blow the energy circuitry, which would have set me back on my path rather than taking me forward. So, and that's very difficult, of course, because of course once you start doing this work, you want to engage fully in it. But
well, it takes some adjustment, and we don't. You're lucky in that she was aware of that aspect of development.
Yeah.
A lot of people are not, and that adjustment of energy is it. Partially, I think our guides work with our energies to help us acclimate, but also it's maybe practice helps to build up your endurance, be able to maintain your focus and deepen the level of information and weather it. I know I'm going to share one brief thing and then ask you how it was for you. But one of the things that happened to me is I had a client who asked extremely esoteric questions, like who is the one and is the void part of the one, and questions like that I had no clue to the real answers. And so I had to go into which is no problem to go up. The problem was coming down. And I ended up with an intense vertigo that lasted about 3.5 hours. I wasn't properly aligned in my body, etc. when I came back. And now, to do the same thing, I would have a much more graceful landing, I'm sure, because we do learn energetically how to deal with that. But for you, did you experience anything like that in terms of, did you just lose focus, or what happened when you?
Well, it's it's very interesting. I have different types of experiences. Sometimes I feel really quite grounded as I'm writing music. First of all, I should point out, I unfortunately I don't have gifts such as clairvoyance or clairaudience. I don't hear the guides talking to me in an audio way, but I
hear the music.
But I hear the music. That's right. But I am aware through feelings of being in the presence of guides.
Yes.
And sometimes more so than others. And sometimes I actually feel like I'm having a mental conversation with. Well, it feels like a mental conversation with myself almost, but I know it's
absolutely. Yeah.
I know what's going on, and it's. So it's very different for me. It varies a lot. Does that experience, Tracey? And it probably does for yourself, I guess, that sometimes you're in different spaces when you're doing that kind of work.
Well, and that's what keeps it interesting. It would be really boring if it was methodical and information came only one particular way, and you tire of it or fatigue with it, but it's unending permutations of intricacy and nuance, and it's unending, it's eternal. You know?
What I have found is when writing music, I need to be specific as well. When asking for music, I need to be specific about what I'm asking for that music for.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
So for instance, a lot of the music that I compose is for healing. I work with therapists, and often they might ask for if I can receive some music for a particular client, and so the process that I would undertake at that point would be to meditate, ask for a piece of music for this particular client, and wait for the inspiration to hit me, which could come in a variety of different ways. It might be that all of a sudden I hear the melody in my head, or it may be that it feels like something is being downloaded, but it's not ready yet, if you understand what I mean.
I absolutely do. Yes. Yes.
And then afterwards, after I start writing the music, I then go through a process of getting a confirmation. So that is, saying, basically asking the question of the guides, have I received this correctly? And then asking them to show me with something that I cannot control with my thoughts. I might ask, for instance, to give me a confirmation by allowing me to see a heron flying over the back garden in the next hour, or to hear a piece of music by Gershwin played on the TV before I go to bed tonight, or something like that.
Yeah.
And invariably.
Do you feel sometimes too that our confirmations come because we can't take it out of our mind, even though sometimes, like you were saying earlier, it flows through you and it's like a dream. It's like hard to recapture, but on other occasions, those messages that we get, sort of like when Carol told you about the music, they're permanent, I guess, too.
Yeah.
Michael, I can't believe it, but we're at the end of the hour.
Oh my goodness.
I know. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your presence on our show. Oh. And for those of you that are listening, you can find Michael at amadeusproject.co.uk and me at mediumtracylockwood.com. Remember, it's never inappropriate to be kind, and without integrity, you have to think.